The call came in at dawn, dragging me out of a dreamless sleep. My hand found the phone before my eyes even opened, muscle memory from years of emergency alerts. Mitchell. My voice sounded like I'd been gargling gravel, rough from too little sleep and too much smoke from yesterday's containment efforts. David, it's Clark. Get your team to base camp immediately. Family of 4 missing in the Blackstone Ridge burn zone. I sat up, sleep vanishing instantly. On my way. The sky was turning from black to deep blue as I pulled into the command post, a temporary city of tents, trucks, and exhausted firefighters. Robert Clark stood by the main operations table, his military-style haircut and rigid posture visible from across the clearing. The gray at his temples seemed more pronounced than last week. The air smelled like pine sap, ash, and diesel exhaust, the scent of another day fighting an unwinnable war against nature. Summer had been brutally dry, turning the forest into kindling that needed just one lightning strike to explode into flame. 3 weeks in, and the Blackstone Ridge fire had already consumed over 20,000 acres with no signs of slowing. Clark looked up as I approached, the permanent worry lines on his forehead deeper than usual. Maps and satellite imagery covered the table, with a red circle marking what I assumed was our target area. "What do we have?" I asked, leaning over to study the topography. Family named Miller, John and Sarah with their 2 children, Emma, age 6, and Joshua, 8. They were on a 3-day camping trip in the northeast quadrant. Clark pointed to the red circle. They were supposed to check in with rangers yesterday evening, never did. James Rodriguez arrived next, followed closely by Thomas Baker. Christopher Wilson and Michael Anderson pulled in together a few minutes later. My team, the best wildland rescue unit in the state. We'd been through hell together more times than I could count, pulled people from situations that should have been certain death. Clark waited until everyone gathered before continuing. The fire jumped containment lines overnight. It's moving northeast at approximately 8 miles per hour, driven by the wind. The Millers' planned exit route is now completely cut off. He traced a finger along the map. Their last known position was this campsite, 15 miles into what's now the active burn zone. Temperatures expected to hit 95 degrees today, humidity at 20%, winds gusting to 30 miles per hour. Perfect conditions for explosive fire growth. My team absorbed this information silently. We'd all seen what those conditions could do. Turn a manageable blaze into an inferno that created its own weather systems, that melted aluminum and shattered rock. "We'll take the eastern access road," I said, already planning the approach. "Should get us within 2 miles of their campsite before the terrain gets too rough for vehicles." Clark nodded, but something in his expression made me pause. He glanced around, making sure no one outside our group was within earshot. "There's something else you should know." His voice dropped lower. "Over the past few years, we've had reports from other teams. Strange sightings in the burned areas." I frowned. Sightings? Some kind of large, aggressive animal. Possibly displaced by the fires, possibly... He stopped himself. "Just be alert. 3 separate teams have reported something unusual. All veteran firefighters with solid reputations." The warning hung in the air like smoke. James and Christopher exchanged skeptical glances. Michael kept his expression neutral, but I knew him well enough to see the tension in his jaw. Thomas leaned forward. "What exactly did they report seeing?" Clark hesitated. "Nothing consistent enough to file an official report. Just glimpses through smoke and ash. Something big. Something that shouldn't be there." I nodded, hiding my skepticism. In 20 years of wildland firefighting and rescue operations, I'd seen what stress, dehydration, and smoke inhalation could do to a person's mind. Hallucinations weren't uncommon when you combined exhaustion with poor visibility and the constant background fear of being trapped by shifting flames. "We'll keep our eyes open," I said, more to satisfy Clark than because I believed there was anything to worry about beyond the usual dangers of a rescue operation in an active burn zone, Thomas wasn't so quick to dismiss it. Those reports came from people like us, David, veterans who know the difference between a bear and... He trailed off, uncomfortable putting words to whatever Clark was suggesting. Let's focus on finding the Miller family, I said firmly. We can worry about Bigfoot after they're safe. Clark rolled up the maps. Gear up. Helicopter recon spotted what might be their tent about half a mile from the coordinates we have, but visibility is poor. You've got maybe 6 hours before the fire reaches that position. We moved with practiced efficiency, gathering equipment and provisions. Each of us carried standard wildland firefighting gear, fire-resistant clothing, helmets, gloves, boots, plus additional rescue equipment, medical supplies, extra water, emergency shelters, and communication devices that probably wouldn't work once we were deep in the burn zone. I did a final check of my pack, mentally running through scenarios and contingencies. 4 civilians, including 2 young children, in an active fire zone with no clear evacuation route. The odds weren't good, but I'd faced worse. As I closed the tailgate of our truck, Thomas approached. "You really think those sightings are just imagination?" he asked quietly. I secured the latch before answering. "What I think is that smoke plays tricks on your eyes. And when you're scared, your brain fills in the blanks with the worst possible picture." "Maybe," Thomas said, unconvinced. "But I've worked with Ramirez from Team 3. He's as level-headed as they come, and whatever he saw last month scared him enough that he's talking about early retirement. That gave me pause. I knew Ramirez, a 25-year veteran who'd survived burns that would have killed most people. "Let's just stay focused on the mission," I said, climbing into the driver's seat. "Find the family, get them out, worry about everything else later." The team loaded up and we pulled away from base camp. The smoke grew thicker as we approached the fire line, turning daylight into an eerie orange twilight. Through gaps in the haze, I could see flames licking at treetops in the distance, their hungry orange glow a stark warning against the darkened sky. 15 miles of rough terrain stretched between us and the Miller family. Somewhere in that smoke-filled wilderness, 4 people were trying to survive against impossible odds. And as much as I wanted to dismiss Clark's warning, I couldn't shake the feeling that this rescue would be different. The truck bounced over the uneven access road, ash swirling in our wake. My knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct honed through years of experience told me we were driving into something worse than just fire. The road became impassable about 2 miles from the Millers' campsite. A massive pine had fallen across the narrow access path, its charred trunk still smoking where flames had licked at its base. Beyond it, more trees lay in various states of collapse, creating a maze impossible for our truck to navigate. "This is as far as we go by vehicle," I said, pulling the emergency brake and cutting the engine. We unloaded in silence, each shouldering packs heavy with gear and water. The smoke hung thick between the trees, turning everything into gray silhouettes. With every breath, I tasted ash and the acrid scent of burning pine. "Air quality's getting worse," Michael noted, adjusting his respirator. "Fire's moving faster than predicted." I checked my watch, just past noon. We'd been on the move since dawn, and already the day felt impossibly long. "Navigation's going to be a challenge," Thomas said, squinting at his map. "Landmarks won't match what's on here anymore." "We stick to the GPS coordinates," I replied, checking the device strapped to my wrist. 15 degrees northeast, 2 miles on foot. The team fell into formation as we hiked deeper into the burn zone. Behind us, relatively untouched forest. Ahead, a gradual transition into hell. First came the scorched understory, then partially burned trees with their crowns still green, and finally, the fully involved sections where everything had been reduced to black skeletons against gray ash. The temperature rose with every step forward. Heat radiated from the ground itself, the earth still cooking from flames that had passed through hours earlier. Sweat soaked through my fire-resistant clothing despite the protective layers. We moved as quickly as safety allowed, each step calculated against the unstable ground. Fallen trees forced detours. Smoldering stumps released toxic fumes that our respirators barely filtered out. The radio crackled occasionally with updates from base camp, though the signal weakened the deeper we pushed into the burn zone. After nearly 3 hours of grueling progress, Thomas raised his fist, the signal to stop. "There," he said, pointing through a gap in the smoke. The Millers' campsite appeared before us in a small clearing. Their blue tent stood eerily intact amidst the surrounding devastation, like an island of normalcy in a sea of destruction. The fire had swept around this pocket, but somehow left it untouched. A quirk of terrain and wind direction that occasionally created these strange safe zones. "Spread out," I ordered. "Standard search pattern. Look for any signs of where they might have gone." We approached methodically, eyes scanning for movement or bodies. The absence of the latter brought momentary relief, but the scene before us quickly erased any optimism. The tent entrance gaped open, its zipper torn halfway down. I knelt at the threshold, peering inside without touching anything. Sleeping bags lay in twisted heaps, one ripped open with synthetic filling scattered across the ground. A child-stuffed rabbit sat abandoned in the corner, one ear singed black. "They left in a hurry," I said, standing back up. James nodded. "Or were forced out." I circled the perimeter of the site while the others examined different sectors. A picnic table still held the remains of an interrupted meal. Plates with half-eaten food now covered in ash, cups tipped over, a water bottle rolling back and forth in the hot wind. Christopher crouched near a backpack that had spilled its contents across the ground. "Found a family photo," he said, holding up a partially burned snapshot. "This must be them." The image showed a smiling couple with 2 young children, a boy and a girl, standing in front of a lake. They looked happy, ordinary, the kind of family that goes camping every summer, makes s'mores around the fire, teaches their kids to fish. "David," Thomas's voice came from the edge of the clearing, tone flat in the way that meant trouble. "You need to see this." I joined him at a large pine tree about 20 feet from the tent. Deep gouges marked its trunk, 4 parallel lines that cut through the bark and into the wood beneath. "Bear?" Christopher suggested, coming up behind us. Thomas shook his head. "Too high, too deep." He placed his hand next to one of the marks for scale. The gouges were easily twice the width of his palm. I ran my fingers along one of the cuts. The edges were clean, not jagged like those made by most animal claws, and they were fresh. The exposed wood hadn't yet darkened from fire or exposure. "Could be damage from falling debris," I said, not believing it even as the words left my mouth. "No." Thomas pointed to similar marks on a neighboring tree. "These are deliberate. Look at the pattern." He was right. The gouges appeared at regular intervals on several trees surrounding the campsite, all at roughly the same height, about 7 feet from the ground. Michael called from the far side of the clearing. "Got tracks over here." We gathered around him as he pointed to a series of footprints leading away from the camp. The soft ground, dampened by morning condensation before the fire approached, had preserved them remarkably well. 2 adults, Michael said, indicating the larger prints, and 2 smaller sets, children. They were running. I followed the trail with my eyes. It led toward a rocky outcropping to the north, away from the advancing fire line. A logical escape route, especially if they'd been cut off from their vehicle. What about these? Thomas crouched beside another set of prints interspersed with the human ones. My stomach tightened. The prints were unlike anything I'd encountered in 20 years of wilderness work. Elongated and deep, each impression measured at least 15 inches in length. They showed what looked like 5 distinct toe marks at the front, splayed wide apart, with a narrower heel section. "Mountain lion?" James suggested, but his expression said he didn't believe it. "Too big," Thomas replied. "And the stride length..." He measured the distance between prints. Whatever made these was taking steps over 6 feet apart. Christopher photographed the prints while James moved away to radio our findings to base camp. I heard him struggling to describe what we'd found without sounding alarmist or crazy. "Base, we've located the campsite. No sign of the family, but evidence they left in a hurry. We found tracks heading north toward the ridge. Following now." The radio crackled with Clark's response, barely audible through the static. "Copy that. Be advised, Firefront has accelerated. You have approximately 4 hours before your position is overrun. Satellite shows a possible extraction point at the North Ridge clearing if you can get the family there." "Roger that," James replied. "We'll advise when we have visual on subjects." While they communicated, I continued examining the site. Something about the scene felt wrong beyond the obvious signs of panic. The family's food supplies were scattered but not consumed. Their cooler lay on its side, contents melting in the heat. Bears or other scavengers would have torn into the food, yet it remained untouched. The wind shifted suddenly, bringing a fresh wave of smoke that reduced visibility to mere feet. Through the gray haze, I spotted something that made me freeze. About 30 yards from the campsite, a young pine tree had been snapped clean in half, not burned, not cut, but broken at shoulder height. Next to it, another tree showed the same damage, and another. I walked toward them, following a line of destruction that paralleled the family's escape route. Each tree was broken in exactly the same way, creating a path through the forest wide enough for something large to pass through. "Everyone, gather up," I called, returning to the campsite. "We need to move. Fire's picking up and we've got a trail to follow." The team collected their gear with practiced efficiency. No one mentioned the strange tracks or the broken trees, but I saw the concern in their eyes. We'd all worked wilderness rescue long enough to know when something didn't fit natural patterns. "Those claw marks," Christopher said quietly as we prepared to move out. "You ever seen anything like that before?" "Probably bear damage from before the fire," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Territorial marking." He nodded, but his expression remained troubled. We set off following the Miller's trail, moving at a quick pace. The tracks led us deeper into the forest, away from the most heavily burned areas. The human footprints told a clear story. They had started at a walk, then broken into a run. In some places, the smaller tracks disappeared, suggesting the children had been carried. The strange, elongated prints followed them the entire way. The afternoon light began to fade, not from approaching sunset, but from the thickening smoke. Through gaps in the haze, we caught glimpses of orange flames climbing distant trees. The fire was moving faster than predicted, driven by shifting winds that swirled unpredictably through the mountain terrain. Heat pressed against us from all sides as we pushed forward. Each breath became more labored, even through our respirators. Ash fell like gray snow, covering our shoulders and equipment. The world narrowed to the few feet of ground ahead. The next footprint, the next broken branch that might indicate which way the family had fled. As evening approached, the forest around us took on an eerie glow. The advancing fire line painted everything in shades of orange and red, turning shadows into writhing shapes between the trees. The smoke created a ceiling above us, trapping heat and light in an otherworldly bubble. I checked my GPS again. We'd covered nearly 2 miles since leaving the campsite, heading steadily northeast toward the rocky ridge where a helicopter might be able to reach us. If the Millers had maintained this direction, they stood a chance of reaching higher ground above the fire line, unless something had caught them first. The thought formed unbidden in my mind as I stared at yet another set of the strange, elongated footprints pressed deep into the ash-covered ground. Whatever had made them had been tracking the family with single-minded purpose, following their every turn and detour. "David." Thomas's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He pointed ahead where the human tracks suddenly scattered in different directions. "I think something happened here." The team gathered around the site. The ground told a chaotic story, adult footprints circling protectively, children's tracks moving behind a fallen log, then more of the elongated prints, deeper here as if whatever made them had lunged or pounced. They were ambushed, Michael said quietly. I knelt to examine a dark stain on a nearby rock. My fingers came away red. Blood, I confirmed. Not much, but fresh. James looked at his watch. Light's fading fast. Fire's less than 3 miles behind us now. We keep moving, I said, standing. The tracks continue that way. I pointed toward the ridge. At least some of them got away. As if to punctuate my words, the wind shifted again, bringing a fresh surge of smoke and an ominous cracking sound from the forest behind us. The fire was picking up speed, fed by the evening breeze. The orange glow on the horizon grew brighter, visible even through the thick haze. We had perhaps 2 hours before the flames reached our position. 2 hours to find the Miller family and somehow get everyone to safety. We continued following the trail as afternoon faded into evening, each step taking us deeper into the unknown. The strange prints never disappeared, always shadowing the human tracks, sometimes veering away only to rejoin them further ahead. Whatever had made them was hunting with intelligence and purpose. The broken trees continued too, a path of destruction that no natural fire could explain. Some had been snapped at the trunk, others uprooted entirely, all forming a rough corridor that paralleled the family's desperate flight. Through the smoke ahead, the rocky outcropping of the ridge finally became visible, our destination and best hope for extraction. But between us and that safety lay another mile of burning forest and whatever creature had left those tracks. The approaching flames cast long shadows through the trees, turning the forest into a nightmare landscape of dancing light and impenetrable darkness. In that shifting illumination, I caught movement at the edge of my vision, something large passing between distant trunks too quickly to identify. The flickering orange glow of distant flames cast our shadows long across the ash-covered ground as darkness fell around us. My team kept moving forward, following the chaotic trail of footprints and broken vegetation. The smoke thickened with each passing minute, making it hard to see more than 20 feet ahead. I wiped sweat and ash from my forehead, squinting through the haze. Something caught my eye, a slight movement in a tall pine about 50 yards away. I froze, raising my hand to signal the others to stop. "There," I said, pointing toward the tree. "Up in the branches." Thomas lifted his binoculars. "It's a child." My heart jumped. Through the smoke and darkness, I could just make out a small figure huddled against the trunk, about 20 feet up. The miller's daughter. It had to be. "Emma!" I called out, breaking into a run toward the tree. No response came from the small shape. When we reached the base of the pine, I called up again. The tiny figure didn't move or answer. Michael immediately dropped his pack and tested the lowest branches. "I'll get her," he said, pulling on his climbing gloves. Michael moved up the tree with practiced efficiency, testing each branch before putting his weight on it. Some of the bark was scorched, but the pine had somehow escaped the worst of the fire. I watched his steady progress, acutely aware of the approaching fire line behind us. "She's unconscious," Michael called down after reaching her. "Looks like she climbed up here and passed out." "Can you bring her down safely?" I asked. Michael nodded and carefully worked to secure the child. He tied a quick harness from rope in his pack, creating a makeshift seat to lower her safely. The girl was limp as a rag doll as he worked. "Ready?" he called. "I'm sending her down now." We gathered below, arms ready. James and I caught the small body as Michael lowered her slowly. She was incredibly light, too light, and her skin felt hot and dry under my fingers. Her clothes were torn and covered in soot, her face streaked with dirt and what looked like dried tears. I laid her gently on the ground and checked her vitals while Michael descended. Her pulse was rapid but regular, breathing shallow but present. No obvious injuries beyond minor scrapes and burns. I lifted her eyelids, pupils responsive but dilated. "Dehydration," I said, reaching for my canteen, "and smoke inhalation, but she's alive." I dampened a cloth and wiped her face, then moistened her cracked lips with a few drops of water. She stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. "Emma? Emma, can you hear me? We're firefighters. We're here to help you." Her eyes opened halfway, unfocused and confused. Her lips moved, forming a single word that came out as barely a whisper. "Monster." She went limp again, falling back into unconsciousness. I exchanged glances with Thomas, who stood watching the surrounding forest with his rifle ready. "We need to get her to safety," I said, lifting her small body into my arms. She couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds. "There's a rock formation up ahead. We can set up a temporary shelter there while we wait for extraction." The outcropping of boulders looked like a solid fortress rising from the forest floor, offering protection on 3 sides. We moved quickly, carrying Emma between us, our eyes constantly scanning the smoky darkness. The wind shifted, temporarily clearing the air enough to reveal the massive wall of flames advancing in the distance. We had 2 hours at most before it reached our position. Behind the largest boulder, we created a small protected area. Christopher spread out an emergency blanket while I laid Emma down. James immediately got on the radio, requesting evacuation. "Base, this is Rodriguez. We've found one of the children. Emma Miller, age 6. She's alive but needs immediate medical attention. Requesting helicopter extraction at the North Ridge coordinates." The radio crackled with static. Clark's voice came through, broken and distorted. "Roger. Extraction. 30 minutes. Fire conditions. Prepare landing zone." James looked at me. "Signal's breaking up, but they're sending a helicopter. ETA 30 minutes if conditions allow." I nodded and turned my attention back to Emma. I placed a cool compress on her forehead and managed to get a few more drops of water into her mouth. Her breathing seemed slightly stronger now, but she remained unconscious. Thomas and Michael took up positions at the edges of our makeshift shelter, weapons ready, eyes constantly scanning the surrounding forest. Christopher kept watch on the advancing fire line while helping me tend to Emma. The night grew darker around us, the only light coming from the approaching fire and the occasional beam from our flashlights. The wind carried ash and embers through the air, some landing dangerously close to our position. The crackle of burning wood and the distant roar of the fire created a constant background noise. "David," Christopher's voice was tense. "What about the rest of the family?" "We keep looking once Emma's evacuated," I replied, though I had little hope for the others after seeing the blood and signs of struggle. "Right now, she's our priority." Emma stirred again, her face contorting into an expression of fear even in unconsciousness. She mumbled something I couldn't understand, her small hands clutching at the blanket. That's when we heard it. A low, rumbling howl cut through the night, seeming to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't the sound of any animal I'd encountered in 20 years of wilderness work. Not bear, not wolf, not mountain lion. It started deep and guttural, then rose to a pitch that made the hair on my arms stand up despite the heat. The sound died away, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the distant fire. We all looked at each other, expressions hidden in the shadows but postures telling the same story. Tense, alert, afraid. "What the hell was that?" Christopher whispered. I had no answer. My mouth went dry as I remembered Clark's warnings, the strange tracks, the broken trees. The howl came again, closer this time. My skin crawled with a primal fear I hadn't felt since childhood. James tightened his grip on his rifle. Thomas and Michael moved closer to our position, forming a protective circle around Emma. "James," I said, keeping my voice steady, "call base again. Tell them to hurry that helicopter." James nodded and got back on the radio, his voice urgent but controlled. "Base, this is Rodriguez. We need immediate extraction. Repeat, immediate extraction. We have Situation developing. He didn't elaborate. What could he say that wouldn't sound crazy? I reached for my own rifle, checking that it was loaded and ready. The weight of it felt reassuring in my hands, though some part of me doubted it would make much difference against whatever had made that sound. Through gaps in the smoke, I caught glimpses of movement between the trees. Something large shifting position, circling our location. I strained my eyes, trying to make out details, but the combination of darkness and smoke made it impossible to see clearly. Thomas moved to the edge of our shelter, peering into the darkness with his rifle raised. "There's something out there," he whispered, moving between those pines. I joined him, focusing where he pointed. At first, I saw nothing but shadows and smoke. Then a shape moved, tall, upright, but wrong somehow. It moved with a fluid grace that didn't match its size, stepping silently between trees that would have caused any human to make noise. "Do you see it?" Thomas asked. "I see something," I replied, unwilling to put a name to what my eyes were telling me. The fire's glow illuminated the area in brief flashes as the wind shifted, giving us glimpses of the forest. In one of those moments of clarity, I saw it distinctly, a dark silhouette moving upright like a person but far too tall. Its proportions were all wrong, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It disappeared back into the smoke before I could make out any details. James joined us, radio in one hand, rifle in the other. "Helicopters coming, but they're fighting the wind. 15 minutes at least. We need to set up a landing zone," I said, grateful for the practical problem to focus on. "That clearing we passed about 100 yards back. You want to move?" Michael asked, glancing at Emma's unconscious form. "With that thing out there?" "We don't have a choice," I replied. "Helicopter can't land here." Before anyone could respond, the howl came again, so close it seemed to vibrate the air around us. Emma whimpered in her sleep, her face contorting with fear. Her eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids, trapped in some nightmare that might have been memory. Thomas chambered around in his rifle, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence that followed the howl. "I can see it," he whispered, his voice tight with tension. "At the tree line. 9 feet tall, at least." I followed his gaze and felt my breath catch. The creature stood at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by smoke, but unmistakably present. It was exactly as Thomas had described, enormously tall with a lean build that somehow supported its height. Its limbs seemed too long for its body, hanging at its sides in a way that looked almost painful. The firelight behind it turned it into a silhouette, revealing no details beyond its unnatural outline. Emma began crying in her sleep, soft whimpers that grew louder with each passing second. The creature's head turned at the sound, focusing entirely on our position. Then it stepped forward, emerging from the tree line into the open space between us. The creature moved like nothing I'd ever seen. One moment it stood at the edge of the clearing, a dark silhouette against the fire's glow. The next, it was charging toward us with impossible speed, covering ground faster than any living thing should. Its body moved with a fluid grace that defied its massive size, each stride eating up yards of distance. James reacted first, his rifle coming up smoothly to his shoulder. The shots cracked through the night air, 3 rapid reports that should have dropped any normal animal. The bullets hit. I saw impact dust kick up from the creature's torso, but it didn't even break stride. "It's not stopping," James shouted, continuing to fire. I grabbed my own rifle, bringing it up just as Christopher moved to shield Emma's unconscious form. The creature changed direction slightly, heading straight for him. I squeezed off 2 shots, aiming for center mass. No effect. The monster reached Christopher in seconds. One massive arm swung out, catching him mid-chest. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him flying backward into a tree trunk. The sound when he hit, a wet thud followed by something cracking, told me everything I needed to know. Christopher slid down the trunk and didn't move again. "Flank it!" I yelled to Michael and Thomas, trying to maintain some semblance of coordinated defense. "Surround it!" They moved immediately, spreading out to create a triangle around the creature. For a brief moment, we had it surrounded, all three of us firing from different angles. The monster seemed to register the threat, stopping in the center of our formation, its head swinging back and forth. Then it moved again, somehow both deliberate and lightning fast. It dropped low and rushed toward Michael, who emptied his magazine in a desperate volley. The bullets might as well have been raindrops. Michael tried to dodge, but wasn't fast enough. The creature's claws tore through his protective gear with horrifying ease, ripping long gashes across his torso. Michael screamed, falling backward as blood sprayed from the wounds. Before he could hit the ground, the monster's jaws clamped around his upper body. The scream cut off abruptly. I kept firing, trying to find some vulnerable spot. The monster dropped Michael's limp form and whirled toward Thomas, who stood his ground. "The head!" Thomas shouted, adjusting his aim upward. "Shoot for the head!" He emptied his magazine into the creature's upper torso and skull, the muzzle flash illuminating a face that belonged in nightmares. For a split second, the monster seemed to hesitate. Then it lashed out with one long arm, catching Thomas across the chest. The blow sent him flying backward into the rocks we'd been using for shelter. He hit hard and crumpled to the ground. Our coordinated defense had collapsed in less than a minute. 3 men down. Only James and I remained. "David, get her out of here!" James yelled, positioning himself between the creature and where Emma lay. "I'll hold it off." I didn't waste time arguing. I scooped up Emma's small body, cradling her against my chest. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. James began firing again, moving backward to maintain distance from the creature. "Go!" he shouted. "I'm right behind you!" We both knew he was lying. I turned and ran, Emma's weight light but awkward in my arms. Behind me, James continued firing, his shots coming in measured intervals. He was making each one count, buying me time. The forest became a blur of shadow and firelight. I ran without looking back, pushing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs. Emma bounced against my chest, her head tucked under my chin. The smoke grew thicker as I moved closer to the advancing fire line, burning my lungs with every gasping breath. James's rifle fire continued for perhaps 30 seconds. Then came a different sound, a single handgun shot, followed by silence. I knew what that meant. The creature's roar echoed through the forest, closer than it should have been. It was coming after us. I pushed harder, my legs burning with the effort. A wall of flames appeared to my right, forcing me to veer left down a ravine. My boots slid on the loose soil, nearly sending us tumbling. I recovered balance and kept moving, listening for pursuit. It didn't take long. The sound of crashing underbrush came from behind, branches snapping like twigs under the creature's weight. It was following our trail, moving faster than I could with Emma in my arms. I jumped a smoldering log, wincing as sparks showered my face and neck. The heat from the approaching fire pressed against us from all sides now, the air shimmering with it. My lungs screamed for clean oxygen, getting only smoke and ash instead. Emma coughed weakly, stirring in my arms. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, looking up at me with confused recognition before drifting closed again. She was still alive, still fighting. I had to keep moving. The sound of pursuit grew closer. I risked a glance back and caught glimpses of movement between the trees, a dark shape flowing through the forest with unnatural speed and grace. The firelight glinted off something wet and dark, coating its front, my team's blood. I turned forward just in time to see a burning branch crash down directly in my path. I veered around it, but the maneuver slowed me enough that I heard the creature gaining ground. Its breathing, a wet, ragged sound unlike any animal I knew, carried over the roar of the approaching fire. Emma's weight, though not significant by itself, began to feel like an anchor. My arms ached from carrying her, and my legs trembled with exertion. Sweat poured down my face, mixing with ash and soot to burn my eyes. My lungs felt raw from the smoke. The creature crashed through the underbrush behind us, gaining with every stride. I could hear its claws tearing through vegetation, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. The distance between us was closing rapidly, no matter how hard I pushed myself. Another fallen tree appeared ahead, this one fully engulfed in flames. Too big to go around, too high to climb over with Emma in my arms. I looked frantically for another path and spotted a narrow gap beneath the trunk where it had fallen across a depression in the ground. I dropped to my knees and rolled onto my back, sliding under the burning log with Emma held tight against my chest. Heat seared my face as I pushed through to the other side. Emma whimpered as sparks landed on her exposed skin, but the barrier would slow the creature, at least momentarily. I scrambled to my feet and resumed running, my legs leaden with fatigue. Every muscle screamed for rest, but the sounds of pursuit had already resumed. The creature had barely slowed at all. The forest ahead became a maze of fire and smoke. Trees burned like torches, casting hellish light across the landscape. The ground itself smoldered in places where dried leaves and pine needles had ignited. I picked my way through, searching for some path that might give us an advantage. Emma's weight pulled at my arms, making each step harder than the last. She had begun to shiver despite the heat, her small body going into shock. I couldn't keep this pace much longer, and the creature showed no signs of tiring. 20 minutes. 20 endless minutes of running through burning hell with Emma's small body clutched against my chest. My lungs burned with each ragged breath, drawing in more smoke than air. My legs moved on pure instinct now, pushing forward when every muscle screamed to stop. I stumbled into a small clearing, nearly falling as my boot caught on an exposed root. Emma made a small noise as I jostled her, but her eyes remained closed. The clearing offered momentary respite, less smoke, fewer active flames, but the surrounding forest burned in a wall of orange and red. Something moved near a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. I tensed, expecting the worst, but the movement was too small, too hesitant. I stepped closer, squinting through the haze. A boy. A young boy with wide, terrified eyes peered out from beneath the massive trunk. He clutched something dark in his hands, pressing it against his chest like a shield. "Joshua," I called, my voice raw from smoke. "Joshua Miller?" His head jerked up at the name, eyes widening further. He pressed himself back against the dirt as I approached. "It's okay," I said, kneeling awkwardly with Emma still in my arms. "I'm David Mitchell. I'm a firefighter. I'm here to help you." The boy, Joshua, stared at me, then at his sister in my arms. His face was streaked with soot and tears, his clothes torn and dirty. He clutched what I now recognized as a piece of adult-sized jacket, the fabric ripped and stained dark in places. "Is she—" His voice came out as barely a whisper. "She's alive," I assured him. "Just unconscious. We found her in a tree. Can you come out now? We need to move." Joshua hesitated, then slowly crawled from beneath the log. He stood on shaky legs, still gripping the piece of jacket. His eyes darted constantly to the trees around us. "Where are your parents, Joshua?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he pointed deeper into the forest, toward the north where the fire burned brightest. His hand trembled. "It took them," he whispered finally. His voice cracked. "It took Dad first. Then Mom tried to... She told us to run and..." He broke off, fresh tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. I knew what he meant. I'd seen the blood at the ambush site, the signs of struggle. I'd seen what the creature could do to grown men with weapons and training. A family camping in the woods wouldn't have stood a chance. "I need to get you both out of here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you walk?" Joshua nodded, but his legs looked ready to give out. He'd been running and hiding for hours, maybe longer. "Stay close to me," I instructed, shifting Emma's weight in my arms. "We need to head east, away from the fire. We started moving, Joshua stumbling along beside me. His hand reached out to grip the edge of my jacket as we walked. Every few steps, he looked back over his shoulder. "How long have you been hiding?" I asked as we picked our way across the clearing. "Since last night," Joshua answered, his voice small. After it got Mom, Emma and I ran different ways. I couldn't find her. The poor kid had been alone all night, hiding from that thing, probably hearing its howls while watching the forest catch fire around him. I couldn't imagine the terror. We reached the edge of the clearing where the terrain sloped downward. Heat blasted our faces as we looked at the burning trees we needed to pass through. Joshua balked, pulling back on my jacket. "We can't go that way," he whispered. "We have to," I replied. "The fire's worse in every other direction." I took a step forward, but Joshua stumbled, nearly falling. His legs gave out completely, and he sat heavily on the ground. "I can't," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't run anymore." I looked at the boy, then at Emma in my arms, then at the burning forest ahead. The decision was impossible, but there was no decision to make. I couldn't leave either of them. "Hold on," I said, kneeling beside him. "I'm going to carry you both." Joshua looked at me doubtfully. "Climb onto my back," I instructed, shifting Emma to one arm and turning slightly. "Put your arms around my neck and hold on tight." He hesitated only a moment before scrambling onto my back, his thin arms wrapping around my neck. I hoisted him up, getting a secure grip under his legs while cradling Emma against my chest with my other arm. Their combined weight wasn't excessive, they were just kids, but after 20 minutes of running, after fighting that creature, after losing my entire team, my body was reaching its limits. My legs shook with the effort of standing. "Hold on tight," I told Joshua. "Don't let go, no matter what." He tightened his grip as I started forward again, moving slower now with both children. Each step required conscious effort. Each breath burned in my lungs. The heat grew more intense as we entered the burning section of forest. A howl cut through the roar of the fire, that same unearthly sound that had haunted us all night. Joshua's arms tightened around my neck, nearly choking me. "It's coming," he whispered directly into my ear. "It's been hunting us since last night. It got Dad first, then Mom. It's smart. It waits and watches." Another howl answered the first, this one from a different direction. My blood ran cold despite the surrounding heat. "There's more than one?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from Joshua's reaction. "Two," he whispered. "They hunt together." 2 creatures. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My team had been killed by just one of these things. Now there were 2, and I was alone with 2 injured children. I pushed forward, ducking under burning branches, stepping over smoldering logs. The smoke grew thicker, making my eyes stream with tears. Joshua coughed against my neck, his small body shaking with each hack. Emma stirred in my arms, making a small noise of distress. Her eyes opened briefly, unfocused and confused. "Monster," she mumbled, the same word she'd spoken before. "It's okay," I lied. "You're safe now." Her eyes drifted closed again. My arms burned with the effort of carrying both children, but I couldn't stop. The howls continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always moving, circling us. Joshua leaned close to my ear again. "They're hurting us," he whispered. "Like wolves. Dad told us stories about wolf packs." The kid was right. The creatures weren't just chasing us, they were directing our movement, forcing us to take certain paths through the burning forest. The realization made my skin crawl. I reached for my radio with my free hand, awkwardly pulling it from my belt while trying not to drop Emma. The device crackled with static when I pressed the transmit button. "Base, this is Mitchell. I found both children, Emma and Joshua Miller, both alive. My voice came out as a rasp. We're approximately 2 miles northeast of the campsite, moving east through the burn zone. Fire's closing in. Need immediate extraction. The radio hissed and popped, Clark's voice cutting through briefly. Copy that. Extraction, North Meadow, 10 minutes. Before I could ask for clarification, the radio gave a final pop and went dead. The battery indicator showed empty. The excessive heat had drained it completely. I tucked the useless radio away and adjusted my grip on the children. North Meadow. That had to be the extraction point Clark mentioned. But which meadow? And how far? Joshua's breathing grew more labored against my neck, each intake a wheezing gasp. The smoke was getting to him. We needed to get to clearer air soon. The forest ahead glowed orange, trees fully engulfed in flames, creating a hellish landscape. No clear path presented itself. Fire was everywhere now, turning the forest into an inferno. Heat pressed against us from all sides, making my exposed skin feel tight and burned. Behind us, something large crashed through the underbrush. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Joshua's trembling body and whispered, "They're coming," told me everything. I pushed forward into the burning maze, my legs threatening to buckle with each step. The weight of the children seemed to increase with every passing minute. Sweat poured down my face, immediately evaporating in the intense heat. Another crash behind us, closer this time. The creatures were done playing with us. They were closing in. "Hold on," I told Joshua, forcing my burning legs to move faster. "Just hold on." The forest opened slightly ahead, showing a glimpse of open space beyond the wall of flames. A meadow. It had to be the extraction point. We just needed to reach it. I pushed through a gap between burning trees, the heat searing my face and arms. Emma whimpered in my grasp, her small body tensing with pain or fear. Joshua buried his face against my neck, trying to escape the smoke. Something moved through the flames to our right, a tall, dark shape passing between burning trees without hesitation. Its hide seemed impervious to the fire that would have killed any normal animal. It moved with deliberate steps, no longer rushing, hunting us. A second shape appeared to our left, mirroring the first. The creatures had us flanked, herding us exactly where they wanted us to go. I had no choice but to keep moving forward, carrying these two traumatized children through hell while being stalked by monsters that shouldn't exist. My team was gone. Our weapons had proven useless. The fire was closing in. And somewhere ahead lay our only hope of survival, if we could reach it in time. The meadow opened before us like a faint promise of salvation in the inferno. My legs were barely working now, muscles quivering with each step as I carried both children through the last stretch of burning trees. The smoke thinned slightly in the open space, allowing me to see more than a few feet ahead for the first time in what felt like hours. Joshua's arms hung limply around my neck, his breathing ragged against my ear. Emma remained still in my arms, her small face pressed against my chest. I staggered forward into the center of the clearing, my vision swimming from exhaustion. A mechanical thrumming cut through the roar of the surrounding fire. I looked up, squinting through the smoke. A beam of light sliced through the haze from above, sweeping across the meadow before fixing on us. The helicopter hovered about 100 feet overhead, its spotlight illuminating our position in harsh white light. The wash from its rotors pushed the smoke away momentarily, giving us a brief pocket of clearer air. It also stirred the flames at the meadow's edge, whipping them higher and more frenzied. A voice crackled through a loudspeaker, distorted but recognizable as Tyler Johnson's. "Mitchell, stand by for extraction. We're coming down as far as we can." The helicopter descended slowly, fighting against unstable air currents created by the fire. It hovered about 20 feet above us, unable to land in the uneven terrain. The downdraft from the rotors hit us in waves, hot and gritty with ash. A crew member leaned out the open side door, gesturing frantically. Even without hearing him, I understood. They couldn't come lower. Tyler's voice came again through the speaker. "We can only take one. Repeat, one passenger only. Fire conditions and fuel status won't allow for more." The words hit me like a physical blow. One child. I had to choose. Joshua slid from my back, his legs buckling as they touched the ground. I kept one arm around him to keep him upright while still holding Emma. "What's happening?" Joshua asked, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. "The helicopter can only take one of you," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "They'll come back for the other." I looked at the two children, weighing an impossible choice. Emma remained unconscious, her breathing shallow, skin hot with fever. She needed immediate medical attention. Joshua was exhausted but conscious, aware of what was happening around us. The helicopter rocked in the turbulent air, the pilot fighting to maintain position. We didn't have time for debate. "I'll stay," Joshua said, his young face set with determination that no 8-year-old should have to show. "Take Emma first." I looked down at him. This child who had already lost everything and seen horrors no one should witness. He stared back, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. "I'll come back for you," I promised. "We'll get you out too." The crew member was gesturing more urgently now, making a hurry-up motion with his hand. The fire was advancing on all sides of the meadow, closing our window of opportunity. I knelt down, placing Emma gently on the ground for a moment. I shrugged off my outer jacket. It was scorched and torn, but still provided some protection, and wrapped it around Joshua's shoulders. "Stay right in this spot," I instructed him. "Don't move from here. The helicopter will come back." Joshua nodded, clutching the oversized jacket around him. I picked Emma up again and moved toward the center of the spotlight's beam. The crew member lowered a rescue harness on a line. I caught it and quickly secured it around Emma's small body, checking the straps twice. When I was certain she was safely fastened, I gave the thumbs-up signal. The winch began to pull her upward. I kept one hand on her until she was beyond my reach, watching her small form rise toward the helicopter. She looked impossibly tiny and vulnerable, hanging beneath the massive aircraft. As soon as the crew had pulled Emma safely inside, Tyler's voice came through the speaker again. "We'll be back in 30 minutes maximum. Fire service is cutting a landing zone 2 miles east of your position. Head that way if you can." I raised my hand in acknowledgement, though I doubted they could see the gesture clearly through the smoke. The helicopter began to pull away, banking sharply to avoid the worst of the updrafts from the fire. Before it disappeared into the smoke, I caught a glimpse of Tyler's face in the cockpit window. The doubt in his expression was unmistakable. He wasn't sure he could make it back in time. The sound of the helicopter faded, leaving us with only the roar of approaching flames. I turned back to Joshua, who stood where I'd left him, my jacket hanging from his shoulders like a cape. "Will they really come back?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Yes," I said, hoping I sounded more convinced than I felt. "But we should start moving east like they said. Can you walk?" Joshua took a shaky step forward, proving he could. I put my arm around his shoulders, as much for my own support as for his. My body felt hollow with exhaustion, muscles trembling from the hours of carrying both children. "Mr. Mitchell." Joshua's voice had changed, high with sudden terror. His hand clutched at my arm, fingers digging in painfully. I followed his gaze to the eastern edge of the meadow, where the tree line met the open space. It stood there, just beyond the first row of burning trees, watching us. The creature's form was more visible now than it had been in the forest. Tall and lean, standing upright on 2 legs. Its body seemed to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it, creating a void in the shape of something almost human, but wrong in every detail. "It's here," Joshua whispered, pressing against my side. The creature stepped forward, emerging from the burning trees into the open meadow. Flames licked at its hide without seeming to cause any pain or concern. It moved with the same fluid grace I'd witnessed before, each step deliberate and purposeful. In that moment, I understood what had happened. The meadow wasn't a coincidence. The constant howls, the strategic movements through the forest. The creatures had been driving us here all along. This open space wasn't our salvation. It was a trap. "Where's the other one?" I asked Joshua quietly, scanning the tree line for the second creature. "I don't know," he replied, his voice breaking. "They split up back in the forest." Joshua began to cry then, not the quiet tears from before, but deep, racking sobs that shook his small frame. The sound cut through the background roar of the fire, carrying across the open space between us and the creature. The monster's head tilted at the noise, its attention focusing completely on the boy. It took another step forward, then another, moving with unhurried confidence toward us. Joshua's crying intensified as he grabbed my arm with both hands, his fingers digging into my skin. The creature's pace quickened in response to his distress, its head fixed in our direction with predatory focus. The creature moved toward us with predatory purpose, each step bringing it closer across the meadow. Joshua's sobs grew more frantic, his small body shaking against mine. I couldn't blame him. He'd seen this thing kill his parents, and was certain we were next. I looked around desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. My rifle was gone, lost somewhere in the burning forest during our escape. The helicopter had taken our only real chance of survival with it when it lifted Emma to safety. All I had left was the standard gear on my belt: radio, flashlight, canteen, and my utility knife. The knife. I reached down and unclipped it from my belt, pulling it from its sheath. The 6-inch blade looked pathetically small against the approaching monster, but it was all I had. "Joshua," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "when I tell you to run, I need you to run as fast as you can toward the east, just like the pilot said." The boy looked up at me, his face streaked with tears and soot. "I'm not leaving you," he whispered. "I'll be right behind you," I lied. "But you need to." The creature suddenly accelerated, crossing half the remaining distance between us in a heartbeat. Its movement was fluid and impossibly fast for something its size. There was no time for Joshua to run. The monster lunged forward, its elongated arms reaching for the boy. I reacted on pure instinct, throwing myself sideways and tackling Joshua out of its path. We tumbled across the ground as massive claws whistled through the air where we'd been standing. I scrambled to my feet, pulling Joshua up with me. Before I could push him behind me, the creature pivoted with unnatural speed. One massive claw swept toward us. I turned to shield Joshua, but wasn't fast enough. White-hot pain exploded across my shoulder as the creature's claws tore through my protective gear like it was paper. I felt the skin and muscle beneath part under those razor-sharp edges. The force of the blow knocked me sideways, but I managed to stay on my feet. Joshua screamed, not for me, but in his own pain. The creature's second swipe had caught him across the leg as he tried to run. He collapsed immediately, clutching his thigh where deep gashes immediately began pumping blood. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward with my knife. The creature bent over Joshua's fallen form, its attention fixed on the injured boy. I drove my blade into the side of its neck with all my strength. The knife barely penetrated its thick hide, like trying to stab leather-covered concrete, but it worked. The monster straightened and turned toward me, abandoning Joshua for the moment. Its face, if you could call it that, was a nightmare of wrongness. No distinct features I could describe, just a sense of something that should not exist in our world. I backed up, knife held in front of me, drawing the creature away from Joshua. Blood ran down my arm from my shoulder wound, but adrenaline kept the pain at bay. Joshua lay on the ground behind the creature, his leg bleeding heavily, his face pale with shock. The monster stalked toward me with that same deliberate, confident gait. It knew I couldn't hurt it. It knew I couldn't escape. It was just deciding how to kill me. I feinted to the left, then darted right, trying to circle back toward Joshua. The creature anticipated my move and cut me off, one long arm sweeping out to block my path. Its claws caught my chest, ripping through my shirt and tearing 4 parallel lines across my torso. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. The pain was immediate and intense, like being branded with hot iron. Blood soaked my shirt almost instantly. The creature pressed forward, sensing weakness. I slashed wildly with my knife, catching its arm. The blade skittered across its skin without causing any visible damage. It was like trying to cut stone. It struck again, faster than I could react. Claws raked down my left arm, shredding flesh from elbow to wrist. I cried out, dropping to one knee as blood poured from the fresh wounds. My grip on the knife weakened, but I managed to keep hold of it. We were less than 20 feet from Joshua now. The boy had pulled himself against a fallen log, using my jacket as a makeshift tourniquet around his leg. His eyes were wide with terror as he watched our struggle. The creature loomed over me, preparing for what would surely be a killing blow. In desperation, I lunged upward with the knife, aiming for its head. The blade struck near its eye, and something unexpected happened. The monster flinched backward. Actually flinched. It was the first sign of vulnerability I'd seen. Every bullet my team had fired into its body had been shrugged off, but something about the knife near its head had caused a reaction. I didn't have time to consider why. The creature recovered quickly and charged, bowling me over. We crashed to the ground, its weight crushing me as its claws dug into my arms, pinning me down. Its face hovered inches from mine, and a smell like rotting meat washed over me. I gagged, turning my head away. Its jaws opened, revealing rows of teeth that no natural animal should possess. I struggled desperately, but its strength was overwhelming. One of my arms was pinned completely, but my right hand still clutched the knife. The creature bent lower, its jaws moving toward my throat. With every ounce of strength I had left, I twisted my right arm and drove the knife upward, aiming for the side of its head. The blade met resistance, then suddenly slid in, finding a soft spot near the temple. The monster reared back, making a sound I'd never heard before. Not a howl or roar, but a high-pitched keening that sent chills through my entire body. Its grip on my arms loosened slightly. I pushed deeper with the knife, twisting the blade inside its skull. The creature thrashed violently, nearly tearing the knife from my hand. I held on, continuing to work the blade deeper. Dark, thick fluid that wasn't quite blood ran down my arm. With a final convulsion, the monster collapsed, its full weight crashing down on top of me. The impact drove the air from my lungs. For several terrifying seconds, I couldn't breathe, pinned under the massive body. With tremendous effort, I pushed against the creature, creating just enough space to slide out from under it. I lay on the ground beside the motionless form, gasping for air. My knife remained embedded in the thing's skull. I forced myself to my knees, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through my shredded shoulder, chest, and arm. Blood soaked most of my upper body now. I crawled toward Joshua, leaving a trail of red in the dirt behind me. The boy was conscious, but barely. His face had gone from pale to gray, his eyes unfocused. The makeshift tourniquet had slowed, but not stopped the bleeding from his leg. The gashes were deep, possibly to the bone. "Joshua," I said, gently tapping his face, "stay with me, buddy." His eyes flickered toward mine. "Is it dead?" he whispered. I glanced back at the monster's motionless form. "Yeah," I said, "it's dead." "There's two," he reminded me weakly. I looked around the meadow, scanning the tree line for signs of the second creature. Nothing moved except the flames that continued to consume the forest around us. "We need to go," I said, more to myself than to Joshua. "Can you stand?" He tried to push himself up, but immediately collapsed. "I can't feel my leg," he said, his voice small and frightened. I knew what that meant. Shock was setting in. If I didn't get him medical attention soon, he would die from blood loss. Every fiber of my being protested as I forced myself to stand. My own injuries screamed for attention, but I pushed the pain aside. I bent down and carefully lifted Joshua, trying not to jostle his injured leg. He weighed almost nothing in my arms, a small bundle of bones and terror. "I've got you," I told him, settling him against my chest. "We're going to make it out of here." He nodded weakly, his head falling against my shoulder. In the distance, I heard the faint sound of engines. Not the helicopter returning, but something on the ground. Trucks, maybe. Chainsaws. The rescue crews cutting the landing zone Tyler had mentioned. I oriented myself toward the sounds and took the first painful step eastward. Joshua's blood quickly soaked through my already blood-drenched clothing. My own wounds continued to bleed, but more slowly now. Not a good sign. My body was conserving blood flow, a precursor to shock. Every step was agony. My legs trembled beneath me, threatening to give out completely. But I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, carrying Joshua away from the meadow and the monster's corpse. Behind us, the fire crept closer to the creature's body. Soon there would be no evidence it had ever existed, just like with my team, just like with Joshua's parents. The flames would consume everything, leaving only ash and questions no one would believe the answers to. I staggered forward, focusing on the distant sounds of engines. Joshua's breathing grew shallower against my chest. His eyes had closed, but he was still alive, still fighting. "Stay with me," I whispered to him. "Your sister's waiting for you." I staggered forward through the burning forest, each step sending waves of pain through my shredded body. Joshua lay limp in my arms, his blood mixing with mine and soaking through our clothes. The claw marks across my chest and arm burned like fire, matching the actual flames that surrounded us. My shoulder throbbed where the creature's claws had torn through muscle, and I could feel my strength fading with each labored step. The sounds of engines and chainsaws in the distance were my only guide, a promise of rescue that seemed impossibly far away. I adjusted Joshua's weight, trying to keep pressure off his mangled leg while supporting his head against my less injured shoulder. "We're getting closer," I told him, though I wasn't sure he could hear me. "Just a little farther." His eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glazed with pain. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice so faint I barely caught it. "Your sister's safe," I said, choosing to answer a different question. "The helicopter got her out. We're going to see her soon." Joshua's face relaxed slightly before his eyes closed again. His breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps that frightened me more than the fire closing in around us. The makeshift tourniquet I'd applied to his leg had slowed the bleeding, but he'd already lost too much blood. A wall of flame blocked our path ahead, stretching between the trees like a living barrier. I turned south, searching for a way around it, my legs trembling beneath me. The weight of the boy in my arms felt like it had doubled in the past hour, though he couldn't have weighed more than 60 pounds. "Just a little detour," I murmured, more to keep myself focused than for Joshua's benefit. "We'll get there." The forest floor was treacherous, covered in burning debris and hidden sinkholes of ash. Twice my boot caught on fallen branches, nearly sending us both crashing to the ground. Each stumble sent fresh agony through my torn muscles. My left arm had gone almost numb, which was probably a blessing considering the state of it. I had no idea how long I'd been walking. Time had lost all meaning in this nightmare landscape of smoke and flame. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I forced one foot in front of the other, following the distant mechanical sounds that promised salvation. Joshua stirred against my chest, his small body shivering despite the intense heat surrounding us. "Cold," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I know, buddy," I said, recognizing the advancing signs of shock. "We're almost there." His eyes opened again, clearer this time. "The monster, it's dead," I reminded him. I killed it. The other one? I swallowed hard. I'd been trying not to think about the second creature that Joshua had mentioned. There had been no sign of it since we left the meadow, but that didn't mean it wasn't out there, watching, waiting. "We're almost to the rescue teams," I said instead of answering directly. "Lots of people with guns and trucks and helicopters." Joshua seemed satisfied with this response, or perhaps he simply lacked the strength to press further. His head lolled against my chest as he slipped back into unconsciousness. The smoke grew thicker as dawn began to break, the early morning light filtering through the haze in eerie, diffused rays. The combination of sunrise and flame painted the forest in surreal oranges and reds, like we were walking through some artist's conception of hell. I followed a small game trail around the wall of fire, the path barely wide enough for me to navigate while carrying Joshua. The heat pressed against us from both sides, singing my eyebrows and the exposed skin on my face. My legs gave out without warning. One moment I was walking, the next my knees buckled and I went down hard. I managed to twist at the last second, taking the impact on my already injured shoulder rather than crushing Joshua beneath me. Pain exploded through my body, briefly turning my vision white. I lay there gasping, Joshua sprawled half across me, his blood-soaked leg bent at an awkward angle. "No," I growled through clenched teeth. "Not like this." I forced myself back to my knees, gathering Joshua into my arms once more. My body screamed in protest as I stood, swaying dangerously before finding my balance. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision, threatening to pull me into unconsciousness. I took one step, then another. The sounds of the rescue operation seemed louder now, though I couldn't tell if that was because we were closer or because my senses were playing tricks on me as my body approached its limits. "Mom said run," Joshua mumbled suddenly, his eyes still closed. "She told us to hide." "You did good," I told him, my voice breaking. "You and Emma did exactly what you should have done." "Dad tried to fight it," he continued as if reciting from a nightmare. "It was so fast." I didn't know what to say to that. No words could erase what this child had witnessed, the horror of seeing his parents killed by something that shouldn't exist. "We're going to get you fixed up," I promised instead. "Your leg will heal." I nearly went down again when my foot slipped on a patch of ash-covered ground. The jolt sent fresh blood flowing from the wounds on my chest, warm and sticky against my skin. The forest began to thin ahead, the trees more widely spaced. Through gaps in the smoke, I caught glimpses of movement, human movement, not the fluid, predatory motion of the creatures. The mechanical sounds were definitely closer now. "Help!" I tried to call out, but my voice emerged as little more than a hoarse whisper. My throat was raw from smoke and exertion, and I lacked the breath for a proper shout. I stumbled forward, driven by a final surge of desperate energy. The trees opened up completely, revealing a hastily established landing zone. Heavy equipment had cleared a rough circle about 50 yards across. Trucks with fire service markings surrounded the perimeter, their headlights cutting through the smoky dawn. Figures moved around the clearing, some operating chainsaws to widen the space, others monitoring the approaching fire line. I stood at the edge of the trees, swaying, trying to make my presence known. Someone shouted. Heads turned in my direction. Then everything happened at once. People ran toward us, firefighters, paramedics, rescue personnel. I heard voices calling for medical kits, for plasma, for stretchers. I stood frozen, unable to make my legs take another step, afraid that if I tried to move I would collapse and drop Joshua. Strong hands reached for the boy, trying to take him from me. I tightened my grip instinctively. "Sir, you need to let us help him," a voice said firmly. A woman in paramedic gear stood before me, her face resolute. "We've got him now." I looked down at Joshua's pale face, then back at the paramedic. Slowly, I loosened my grip, allowing them to lift him from my arms. The sudden absence of his weight made me feel strangely untethered, as if I might float away. Severe lacerations to the right thigh, someone called out as they laid Joshua on a stretcher. Significant blood loss, pulse thready, BP dropping. They whisked him away toward a waiting medical transport. I tried to follow but found my legs wouldn't cooperate. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. "Whoa, easy there," a male voice said as hands grabbed my arms, steadying me. "You're in pretty bad shape yourself." I looked down at my body as if seeing it for the first time. My clothing hung in blood-soaked tatters. Deep gashes crossed my chest and left arm, and my shoulder was a mangled mess of tissue and torn fabric. "The girl," I managed to say. "Emma. Did she make it? The little girl from the helicopter?" "Yeah, they got her to the hospital about 2 hours ago. She's going to be fine." Relief washed over me, momentarily stronger than the pain. I'd done it. Both children were alive. "The other families," I said, remembering Clark's mention of other campers in the area. "Did everyone get out?" "All evacuated safely yesterday," the man replied, guiding me toward another waiting medical team. "The Millers were the only ones we couldn't account for." "Parents didn't make it," I said, the words feeling inadequate for the horror of what had happened. "The children were separated from them during the fire." I couldn't bring myself to mention the creatures. Not now. Maybe not ever. Who would believe me? The evidence was burning away in the forest behind us, if it hadn't already been consumed by flames. They helped me onto a stretcher, and the world tilted again as they lifted me. Hands cut away what remained of my shirt, revealing the full extent of my injuries. "Jesus," someone muttered. "What did this to him?" "Must have been caught in a collapsing structure," another voice suggested. "Those look like puncture wounds from splintered wood." I didn't correct them. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth was too impossible, too horrifying. An oxygen mask descended over my face. The cool, clean air was a shock to my smoke-ravaged lungs. I coughed violently, pain shooting through my chest with each spasm. "Multiple lacerations requiring immediate surgical intervention," a voice reported clinically. "Significant blood loss, probable smoke inhalation, and first-degree burns to exposed skin." They were loading me into a transport vehicle now. Through the open doors, I caught a glimpse of the landing zone where a helicopter was touching down, probably to evacuate Joshua to the same hospital where his sister had been taken. "Is the boy going to make it?" I asked, pulling the oxygen mask aside. The paramedic working on my arm glanced up. "They're doing everything they can. His leg's in bad shape, but kids are resilient. Keep that mask on, please." I let the mask fall back into place, too exhausted to argue. The doors of the transport slammed shut, and the vehicle began moving, bouncing over the rough terrain. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness creep in from the edges of my consciousness. For the first time in what felt like days, I allowed myself to relax, to release the desperate tension that had kept me moving through impossible odds. The children were safe. Emma was already receiving treatment. Joshua was in good hands. I had done everything I could. As consciousness slipped away, my last coherent thought was of the second creature, still out there somewhere in the burning forest. If one of these monsters could be killed, I had to believe the other could be too. But that wasn't my fight anymore. I had fulfilled my duty. I had saved the children. Darkness took me completely as the transport raced away from the burning forest, carrying me toward whatever future awaited beyond this nightmare. 2 days later, I sat propped up in my hospital bed, scrolling through the tablet a nurse had left me. My chest and arm were wrapped in thick bandages, and pain medication dulled the worst of it to a persistent throb. The doctors had told me I was lucky. The gashes across my chest had missed anything vital. My left arm would need extensive physical therapy. But with time, I'd regain most of my mobility. The claw marks on my shoulder had been the worst, deep enough to damage muscle tissue that would never fully repair. Lucky. That's what they kept saying. I didn't feel lucky. I tapped through to Joshua's medical updates. which the hospital staff had been kind enough to share with me. The boy had made it through surgery on his leg. The doctors had managed to repair the damaged muscle and tendons, though they couldn't save all the tissue. He would walk again with time and therapy, but he'd carry those scars forever. Physical reminders of what he'd seen and survived. Emma had already been released to her grandmother's care. The child psychologist's notes mentioned she was showing remarkable resilience for a child her age. They described how she'd begun talking again after her first night at the hospital, asking repeatedly about her brother and, surprisingly, about me. The notes indicated she was experiencing nightmares, but was otherwise adapting well, considering the circumstances. I set the tablet down and picked up the manila folder on my bedside table. The official incident report had been delivered that morning by a stone-faced fire service administrator who didn't meet my eyes. I'd already read it twice, but I opened it again, still not quite believing what I was seeing. The report listed James, Thomas, Christopher, and Michael as killed in the line of duty, their bodies unrecoverable due to extreme thermal conditions in the burn zone. Cause of death: the wildfire. The document detailed how my team had heroically ventured into dangerous conditions to rescue the Miller children, ultimately sacrificing themselves so that I could escape with the kids. It was both true and a complete lie. Not a single mention of claw marks. No reference to the deep gouges in trees or broken pines snapped like twigs. No description of the footprints that matched no known animal. Nothing about the howls that cut through the night, or the creatures that moved through fire like it was nothing. I closed the folder and dropped it on the table. The edges of the paper had crumpled in my grip. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Robert Clark stood in the doorway, his uniform pressed and perfect as always, though the bags under his eyes told a different story. "You look like hell," he said, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "You should see the other guy," I replied, trying for humor and falling flat. Clark nodded toward the folder on the table. "You read it. It's bullshit. It's necessary." He pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed, leaning forward with his hands clasped between his knees. He spoke quietly, though we were alone in the room. "What would you have me put in there? That monsters killed your team? That bullets couldn't stop them? That you killed one with a knife to its brain? Who would believe that? So we lie. We protect people." Clark ran a hand over his face. "We protect the families of your team members who get full benefits and honors this way. We protect the Miller children who've already seen enough horror for 10 lifetimes. And we protect the public from panic over something we don't understand and can't explain." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? I'd seen it with my own eyes and still could hardly believe it. I'd watched James, Thomas, Christopher, and Michael die, trying to fight something that shouldn't exist. I'd killed one of those things myself, felt its blood, or whatever that thick black fluid was, run down my arm as I drove my knife into its skull. "What about the second one?" I asked. "It's still out there." Clark's expression didn't change. Search teams found no evidence of any unusual wildlife in the area. The fire consumed over 50,000 acres. If anything was there, it's gone now. Or it moved. These things aren't stupid, Clark. They hunt. They plan. They coordinated to trap us. Mitchell. His voice took on that commanding tone I'd heard so many times before. "It's over. Let it be over." I turned away, looking out the window at the hospital parking lot. Cars moved in and out, people going about their normal lives, completely unaware that the world was not what they thought it was. "The Miller's grandmother came to see me yesterday," Clark said after a long pause. "She wanted to thank you personally, but you were still sedated. Emma and Joshua will live with her now. She seems like a good woman." "They saw their parents die," I said quietly. "Emma was in shock when I found her. Joshua watched the whole thing. Those kids will never be the same. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for. They'll carry it, but they'll also move forward." Clark stood up, straightening his uniform jacket. Your physical therapy starts next week. Doctor says at least 3 months before you're back to anything resembling normal function. I almost laughed. Normal. Nothing would ever be normal again. I won't be coming back, I said. Clark nodded as if he'd expected this. The department would understand if you needed extended leave. No, I cut him off. I'm done. I can't go back out there. Not after losing my entire team. I didn't say the rest of it. That I couldn't go back into the wilderness knowing what might be watching from the shadows. That every rustle of branches would make me reach for a weapon. That every animal call would have me listening for those unnatural howls. I'll have the paperwork drawn up, Clark said after a moment. Your resignation will be accepted with honors. 20 years of service deserves that much at least. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Clark moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, Mitchell, I believe you. About what you saw out there. What you fought. His voice dropped even lower. You're not the first, but some things are better left unexplained and unrecorded. He left without another word, leaving me with the weight of his admission. Not the first. How many others had encountered these things? How many reports had been buried or altered? How many teams had been lost to creatures that officially didn't exist? I stared at the ceiling, counting the small holes in the acoustic tiles. My body felt heavy with pain medication and exhaustion. The doctors had warned me about the coming months, the physical therapy that would feel like torture, the slow rebuilding of damaged muscle, the exercises to regain mobility in my arm. They hadn't mentioned the other part, the nights I'd wake up hearing James's final gunshot, the way I'd flinch at shadows, how I'd never again walk in a forest without looking over my shoulder. I reached for the pad of paper and pen on my bedside table. My resignation letter would be short. What could I possibly say? That I'd seen monsters and could never go back? That I'd lost friends to creatures that officially didn't exist? That I'd killed something impossible with my own hands? As I wrote the first lines of my resignation, I couldn't help but wonder if there were others like that creature still out there in the wilderness. How many burned areas had they claimed as territory? Were they spreading with each wildfire season? And if someone else encountered them and reported it, would anyone believe them? Or would their reports join all the others in whatever hidden file Clark and his superiors kept? I signed my name at the bottom of the page, making it official. 20 years of service ended with a few strokes of a pen. I set the paper aside and closed my eyes, but all I could see were those creatures moving through flames like shadows, hunting us through the burning forest. All I could hear were Joshua's terrified whispers as he described watching his parents die. All I could feel was Emma's small body shivering in my arms as the helicopter lifted her to safety. I opened my eyes and reached for the call button. I needed more pain medication, though I knew it wouldn't touch the kind of pain that kept me awake. The physical wounds would heal with time, leaving scars I could point to, evidence of what I'd survived. The other wounds, the ones no one could see, those would never fully close. I'd killed something that shouldn't exist and saved 2 children who would grow up without parents. Some might call that a victory. I wasn't sure what to call it. All I knew was that the world had changed for me, and I could never go back to not knowing what lurked in the dark places of the wilderness.